Okay, we're live. So welcome to this week's Monday. So what is it? Monday the 2nd of June. Things fly along quite quickly, really. So this week, welcome to Chen's podcast. This is a weekly podcast that we run at 3 p.m. every Monday, or most Mondays, unless we're on holiday, which we were last week, oddly. So Chen gave us a week off, which was always nice because we don't generally get too much time off from Chen. He likes to keep cracking the whip, keep us working, keep us running. So let's go say hi to Tesla. Thanks for joining, Tesla. Good to see you in the chat. And anyone else that pops in. So Shell, hi Shell. Good to see you. You guys are prompt, probably more prompt than me actually. I know that Jane will be logged in downstairs. Jane from downstairs is always watching, like the eagle eye. And hi to Sarah. Good to see you. Hopefully your book's doing well. Sarah wrote a book for children about spiritual themes, which is quite interesting. So you can always put a link in the chat, Sarah, to your book, if you've got that available. I know that Jane sent it out a while back, but we read it, we thought it was really good. So this week, so what we're going to talk about this week. So this week, we are going to talk about anger, rage, and prisons, basically. So I had a chat with Chen this morning and said, what was the content you'd like to cover today, basically. As usual, there's never a gap. There's always a reply that comes straight back, generally. So he said, right, we're going to talk about anger, rage, and prisons. So I wasn't sure if he meant our own prisons or prisons where prisoners go, obviously when they do wrong things or bad things or become imprisoned. So I'm not exactly too sure on the prison concept, but certainly anger and rage we can talk about from that perspective. So from my perspective, I've done a bit of digging really, and we'll just kind of go down that line. So anger is a fire, whereas rage is a storm, is the way that we can kind of think about things and kind of navigate from there. So prisons really, from my perspective, can be two things. They can be a physical building, a prison, that people go behind bars, or of course there can be emotional and or emotional prisons that we build for ourselves, so kind of energetic prisons as opposed to physical ones. And they're generally consequences of energies that are left unchecked or misunderstood. But certainly from a spiritual perspective, really, anger and rage are not inherently bad emotions. They are negative emotions in the way that we see them, but they're kind of raw energy from that perspective, really. And they kind of signal to us that something's not aligned, something's not right, someone's kind of stepped across that boundary. So that boundary has been crossed, all that deep pain has kind of gone unacknowledged, I guess, for too long, and that's when we can find this anger and kind of rage starting to come forward. But of course, when anger is misrepresented or repressed, or it's just allowed to take over, it kind of becomes a trap to a certain degree, one that can then imprison the kind of spiritual aspect of us in the same way that steel bars do from a physical perspective, really. Just going to say hi to Michelle. Good to see you, Michelle. I guess you brought Jono and Louise out on your mammoth trip around America. It sounds like they had a fantastic time, so that was good. Okay, so anger as a messenger, really, not as a master, effectively. So spiritual anger is often the surface symptom, really, of deeper wounds, of things like, I guess we can think about betrayal, sort of abandonment, powerlessness, and injustices, really, that are carried on from this life, or maybe through from other lives as well. And if these are acknowledged, these feelings tend to fester. We all kind of know when we get angry, if we don't have our say and say the things that we feel, that kind of emotional state tends to fester, really. And of course, that's a negative vibration that sits in our field. And we all know from the kind of teachings of Chen that when those negative vibrations fester and they continue and acknowledged, they do attract entities then. So negative entities, well, they feed negative thought forms, and they kind of create energetic loops from that perspective. And it keeps a person trapped in a cycle, basically like an emotional cycle or a reaction to kind of unconscious behaviour. So we know when we have that anger feeling, the anger kind of talks through us, I'm hurt, I haven't been seen, I've lost my power. There are kind of different wordings that we could use or think about, really, from that perspective. But obviously that is the general concept. So turn that notification off. There we go, that's good. But then keep popping above 2 minutes. So this is the way that we kind of think about anger, really. And of course, we don't really want to be broadcasting anger. It makes us feel bad inside. It makes us feel negative. it increases our blood pressure, our blood flow, we get a red face, we feel annoyed. And for many people, when we become really angry, it takes us days to come down. And we've got to know that extreme anger is it's very stressful for the emotional part of us, really. So rage is kind of the next stage onwards, really. So I guess we can be angry, and we can be angry simmering for quite some time. But then when we kind of erupt, really, rage is that sort of entity influence. So many people who erupt into rage tend to say things like, I'm not sure what happened, or something, or someone else took me over. It's quite a kind of common thing. So anger is one feeling, but rage is almost like you've been kind of poked by something, and something comes in and takes over, really. It's not really just a metaphor, it can be a spiritual reality. The rage, especially when triggered, if we look at like dissociation or traumatic stress, people under huge amounts of stress, that can open a perforation in a person's etheric field, and that invites in spiritual attachments, as we know, lower dimensional entities, negative entities, and they kind of merge in with the conscious awareness of the person that's in that state of rage. So these sort of entities feed on chaos, they love violence, they create fear, and obviously we can think about people in extreme conditions, whether it's a domestic violence situation at home, or it could be soldiers on a battlefield. People that are in that much rage and anger are obviously broadcasting these very low frequency vibrations that are attracting these sort of lower dimensional entities into their space. And for many people, it takes a long time to come down from that feeling as well. So when you've kind of pushed yourself into that state, trying to get back out of that state can be quite difficult. And for some people, that kind of permeates the whole day. Go to bed, wake up the next day, and generally things have simmered down, your emotional state has changed, and you feel a bit better. But obviously, rage is a very kind of explosive emotional feeling to be in. And we need to look at why people are in that state generally. And of course, people will say things like, I don't remember what I did, I felt something else took over control of me, I was watching myself, mates on my body. And these are things that we hear quite often when we're working with people that express extreme anger and rage. And rage that they can't really clarify. Quite often we read the client summaries that come in, and people talk about being pushed into extreme states of rage for no real reason. They don't know why they move into that emotional state, and they find it quite difficult to get out of, which of course is always a difficult thing too, really. I'm just going to say hi to Nicole and Ashley that have joined us. Good to see you folks. And yeah, Michelle, 1,500 miles. Although Joy said to me, he said we didn't do less than 4 hours travelling, which of course is the America thing, isn't it? Because America's so big. Whereas in the UK, if we travel for too long, we just pop off the edge, end up in the water, basically. So you probably struggle to do more than about 6 hours over here without falling off the edge of one end or the other end of our piece of land. But obviously in the States, you can drive for 20 hours solid and still not have reached the other side, I would imagine. But John and Louise said they had a great time. So it sounds like they've got the blast. Saw the sites and things, or some of the sites, which was cool. I think John was quite taken with Sedona, from what I can gather. So we'll hear all about it and see his pickies. So say hi to Jennifer. Good to see you, Jennifer. Thanks for joining. Okay, so prisons in terms of spirit, really. So not all prisons are bars, of course. When we talk about prisons and prisoners, we think about people that have been kind of incarcerated into a physical prison with physical bars. But many people live inside kind of these invisible cells that they build from themselves, really, with suppressed emotions, generational traumas, sort of unforgiveness comes up quite often. And in that state, rage tends to simmer just below the surface. And of course, there's a lot of false beliefs and feelings of unworthiness or powerlessness quite often. So especially in domestic violence situations, people find themselves in a situation that they feel they are powerless and they can't actually speak their truth, they can't say the things they want to say, and they're being controlled. And that is kind of an invisible prison cell, but one that's kind of created by that person, effectively. So these spiritual prisons kind of limit intuition, they disconnect people from the higher self, and the higher self is that connection to that part of us that we need to have really to work from a spiritual perspective. And of course, it tends to reinforce karmic loops. So people that have been through these sorts of control systems before may find themselves in these energetic prisons that they're creating with their own emotional state, really, and also bringing forward generational trauma and that type of thing. So true liberation really isn't just about physical freedom, it's about the energetic freedom and, of course, the emotional, mental freedom at the same time, really. So I guess from my perspective, kind of rounding this part of this up from my point of view, really, the path to liberation really is how do we break free? So first thing is to acknowledge the anger. Let's speak about it. Let's talk about it. I feel really angry. I don't know why. I don't know where it comes from, but it comes up in me. I need to do some digging and some shadow work to work out what's creating that feeling. Because when we know we move into an anger state of extreme anger, and a state of extreme rage, we know there's something that's triggering us to do that. So somebody's saying something, or someone's doing something, someone is having an effect on us that we feel that way, and that, of course, is when that kind of emotional state comes from, really. So we can even write things down to ourselves. And I think writing is one of the spiritual tools that we've forgotten about to a certain degree. I remember years ago when I was first trying to talk to Chen and trying to communicate with my higher self and do that type of thing. I was interested in the automatic writing aspect. No, I just used to sit with a pad and paper and I'd write to myself, kind of, dear Andy, how are you doing today? What are we doing? And just start to wait for that kind of intuitive thought to come in from the guides, basically. And of course, we can do the same thing. So, write yourself a note, dear Andy, I feel really angry today. I'm not exactly sure where this feeling is coming from. And then as you start to write this out, you'll start to get this intuitive thought that will come in as we try and connect to our higher self, or we try and connect to our spirit guides and actually find some answers. So meditation is a good way to do this too, but obviously from a conscious perspective, using pen and paper is actually quite good too. And we're looking for the root. Where did this begin, and what am I really angry about? These are the key things to find, because we need to find the root and the trigger of anger and rage, because we know the feelings and we know the emotional state. We just need to connect it to something, and there is a connection there that needs to be drilled down into, really, so that we can find it. And then when we do find it, we need to clear the attachment. So we need to work with trusted practitioners, people, SRT practitioners. There's plenty of them on this particular conversation, and cool. Each and every one of them is very skilled to basically clear entities, remove contracts, clear negative energy blockages, and clear the things that feed the rage. Because generally, if we're in a state of anger and rage, there's something in our field or around our field that is kind of pushing and feeding that emotional state and making us more angry, creating more rage and negative emotion. And these are the things that we want to clear out of our field. So when we bring ourselves back to a sovereign state, meaning that there's nothing negative connected, then some of these feelings of anger and rage will just dissipate on their own, because they're actually being pushed and controlled by these other negative forces that sit around us we don't tend to see. I'm just going to say hi to Diana. She's also joined, so it's good to see you, Diana. Thanks for coming on, which is good. Okay, so anger shows you where the power is taken or given away. And with guidance, we can call it back and we can protect it. But of course, the other thing is forgiveness, really. Forgiveness is a very powerful tool that we need not to bypass, really. And it's choosing to release the whole, really, of the past and let that learning come into our heart center. So when negative things have been done to us, and we're all adults generally, we've all kind of, certainly most people that watch these podcasts are adults, so therefore we've all been on a journey, we've all had partners, we've had families, we've all been through different and difficult situations in life. And some of those difficult situations when people were kind of connected to will be the triggers, or will try and trigger us, or they've caused pain, anger, all sorts of negative emotions in us. But one of the things we can do again is sit in meditation and just broadcast out forgiveness to those people and say thanks to them, really, because also they've helped us in one way or another. When someone's treated you badly, you do get to learn. It is kind of a test to a certain degree, and we get to kind of see the spirit kind of go through that learning process and that learning state, whereby we know someone's done something to us, it's bad, it's caused anger, pain, rage, that type of thing, but we can forgive them for doing those things. And when we forgive them, we kind of flatline that energy, bring it all back down again, open our heart center, and we just allow that energy to dissipate. Whereas when we really, really have negative feelings towards people, that just builds the fire and continues that whole emotional state. So even when bad things have been done, forgiving the people that have done it is the most positive step forward, and it is the way to kind of put that fire out that's inside you, really. So ultimately, we all long to be free. We're all individual sovereign entities. We don't want people controlling us. We don't really want people keeping us in any type of kind of emotional prison cell, or obviously physical prison from that perspective either. But most people have imprisoned themselves in their own mind. And of course, this is generally through pain, negative influence, unconscious rage, that type of thing. And of course, others are imprisoned spiritually. They're living bound by emotions, traumas, and then we've got the unseen interference that we talk about, and we can obviously clear that very quickly and very easily, which is why we need to invoke an SRT practitioner that can do that for you. So from a spiritual perspective, really, kind of close my part really, anger can be the start of the beginning of a liberation when we understand why we have it, if we're willing to feel it, understand it, and then we want to transform it really. There's always a way back to the light, there's always a way to find the door out of the cage. Generally, we've shut ourselves in our own cage, and the key, of course, is within us, effectively, and that is, I think that's kind of my conclusion from that perspective. So what we'll do is we'll move to Chen, see what he has to say about anger, rage and prisons, basically, and we'll go from there. So I'm just going to set a timer, try and keep Chen on time, which always takes a little bit of management generally. Okay, so Chen's on the clock, timer's running. He's got 30 minutes in the, in front of the microphone really. 30 minutes in front of the microphone, 30 minutes inside me, so to speak. Okay, folks, well, I will hand over Chen and I'll catch you in a bit. Just take the watch off because it's already complaining about that. Yeah, I've got to be married twice in my life. Anyway, off we go. Good day to all. It's my great pleasure again to be able to have this podcast and this narrative. And young Andrew says it's like being married twice, which I thought was quite interesting and quite funny. And of course, these things are a marriage, a union of connection, a union of energy. So whilst he might be married physically to young Jane, who of course is a physical person, then he is connected to my energy. So there is a union, a marriage of sorts, and there are certainly contracts in place between him and I. And these contracts need to be worked with, observed, and adhered to too, of course. So part of my contract with young Andrew is that I will provide spiritual guidance, teachings, and help with his help. And of course, part of his contract with me is to provide me with this well-tuned physical body to be able to use and verbalise the conversation in the way that we do. So we're both married to each other, of course, in different ways. And young Jane is very lucky because she gets the best of both worlds. She gets to spend her physical time with young Andrew, and then the more intellectual time with myself. That's the way that I like to think of things. So welcome to the podcast today. Again, what we wanted to talk about this week, or what I wanted to talk about and converse really, each week we try and find a theme that we know is of interest. It's of interest to different people, and of course it's based upon the spiritual teachings, learnings, and guidance that we provide to you all. So this week I want to talk about emotions really, but the negative emotions. We know that when we're feeling happy, we're feeling happy. It's the negative emotions that come into us, or they seem to come into us from nowhere sometimes, and we're not quite sure where they come from, and of course why they're there. And we all know what it's like to feel angry when someone says something to you that triggers you, as Andrew said earlier, and you have that immediate rush of anger. So you can feel the blood start to course through your body. You know that your blood pressure tends to go up. For many people, the face becomes reddened and the neck becomes reddened. And of course, you can feel your vibration change. You become quite powerful in a state of anger because, of course, anger is an emotion that is used really by people in different ways. But it could be used to get you out of trouble. If you look at the human being going back in time, if you were being chased by some type of big saber-toothed tiger or some type of animal, then anger would be good, a good emotion to have because it would be self-protective. But of course, on the other side, it drains you energetically. And this is what we find with anger, is that a very short burst of anger could sometimes be used in a positive way, a positive setting. When you become angry over time for elongated periods, then of course that's very draining on you energetically. It tends to burn calories. So people that are trying to lose weight will notice that if they have lots of stress in their life and they're spending much time being angry, they burn more calories, so they lose weight generally. And this, of course, is a very negative thing. It's very stressful on the body for all of the histamine and all the other um, emotional receptors to be turned on, feeling that state of negative anger. And then, of course, rage, as Andrew says, rage effectively, if anger is the fire, rage is the storm. So rage is the thing that really takes the anger and then ignites it again, almost like napalm will explode into a huge big fire. Rage is that thing that takes you over. And of course, generally, people don't really move into a state of rage. So when we look at the emotional and etheric field from a spiritual perspective, we see somebody with their trigger that's been pushed, they move into an angry state. They become angry, their thought process is anger based. But to move into a rage based state, generally, for most people, takes something else. And this, of course, is where we see these negative energies come in from the unseen, connecting to the person, and then really pushing that emotional state, really driving very negative thoughts of hatred and negativity to move someone into a state of pure rage. And this, of course, is a very, very negative state to be in. It's very negative to the person that's in that state. And of course, it's very negative to the people around them. And once you've moved from anger that's escalated to rage, then very difficult to come down from because, of course, your body is coursing with adrenaline, with negative hormones, hormones that are designed to keep you alive, really, but not to do harm to other people. And this is where we find lots of circumstances in your daily lives that people could move into a state of rage in a very negative way. So if we think about younger children sometimes, or teenagers that play video games, they don't really understand that when they're playing video games, the subconscious part of them, the part of the intelligence, the spiritual intelligence part, doesn't really know the difference between real life, what's really happening, and what's happening in the mind, what's being created. So when you're watching a film, the film can change your emotional state. So if someone is playing a video game that involves battle and shooting in the way that youngsters tend to, then of course they get themselves into this high adrenaline state and they want to win the game or they want to be part of the team that they're playing things. And therefore, of course, they're driven into this very kind of Neanderthal-like emotional state where they're trying to live for longer, they're trying to exist, they're trying not to get shot, not to die. And of course that's a very stressful place to put the body, and generally it causes anger. So when children come downstairs after playing video games, or teenagers, or adults too, of course, they can be still in that state of anger where their spiritual part of them could wonder if they were about to die. And they've been on that precipice, that edge emotionally. Their blood is filled with hormones, with adrenaline, and they're still cursing. And of course, if things didn't go particularly well, maybe they lost their life in a video game, then anger suddenly turns to rage because they lost. And of course, then we've got this very, very negative emotion. And that person comes downstairs, that lives in your abode, in your house. And of course, they come downstairs with this big cloud of negative energy around them as they're holding this state of rage. But the bigger problem really is that they're also attracting negative entities into that space. They're broadcasting this very low frequency of anger and rage. And we know that negative entities exist in these low frequencies. So it's almost like a big flashing light. For any negative entities in the area, they're going to see that person move from maybe a high vibrating, calm, harmonic, peaceful state of clarity to anger and rage. And of course, these entities will be drawn to that person to try to connect to their energy, to feed off them, to assimilate that low frequency vibration, that low frequency thought process. And of course, these entities will then start to push the thoughts to create more rage and more anger. And that generally overspills to the family. So people living with someone that's playing these sorts of video games that has this very high octane situation, will notice that the whole house becomes quite dramatic and chaos starts to ensue, of course, because they'll come downstairs, they'll get into arguments with their parents or with their siblings or with other people, and of course that starts to create anger in other people in that circumstantial environment around them. And then we have a whole family now at war with each other because one person was playing a video game, allowed their emotional state to move into this very negative, angry vibration, and then maybe into rage, the state of rage and negativity. And of course, that called in lots of unseen entity control, which will then push that clarity of that situation to make it worse. And this is what you'll notice, I'm sure, if you think about your families, when people are in a very negative, angry-based state, they generally pull other people into it. So you could be sat downstairs enjoying yourself, reading a book, watching the television or doing the washing up, and someone walks into the room that's in an anger-based state, caused by different things. Of course, it could be PTSD, it could be lots of soldiers and veterans that come back from war have been living in these high-octane situations for a long time. It's very stressful for the emotional part of them. Of course, they find that they can actually flip. One minute they can be quite happy, and then they might hear something, or someone might say something, but something flips like a switch in their emotional environment, and suddenly they go into a protective, anger-based or rage-based emotional state. And then, of course, that affects everyone in the room. So the animals will notice. You'll notice that animals, cats and dogs, will leave the room when someone walks in with a very negative vibration, with that anger or that rage-based emotional feeling. Animals pick up on it immediately. They see the vibration of the field dropping, the environment drops. It's a bit like a big negative cloud has walked in. So the dog will disappear, the cat will be gone through the cat flap in seconds when they see that person moving in that state. And then, of course, other people around them get drawn into these arguments and chaotic situations. So anger and rage are two emotional states that are triggered generally from something. And if you know people in your families or people around you, people that you're connecting with, people in your circumstantial environments that are struggling to control themselves, then we need to go back, as young Andrew did say at the start, to find where that button is, what actually happens in someone's life that causes them to move into this anger-based state. And generally, it's some sort of pain or trauma. So they've been through experience, someone said or done something nasty to them, or they perceived it to be nasty in their earlier life or in their past. And then, of course, the protective part of the psyche turns that into anger. So we've got this protective part of the psychological aspect trying to protect the person or the energetic form or the spiritual conscious awareness by using anger. And of course, it's a cyclic repeat process. So people that continue to get angry for driving, we see people with road rage, we call it rage. So again, anger, rage, and so the two things go together. Someone pulls out in front of you and you take it as a personal thing. And then that person starts to beat the horn and throw their fists and suddenly want to have a fight, and a crazy situation starts to, or a chaotic crazy situation starts to envelop in the car. Of course, that person may not have seen you coming down the road and they've misjudged your space or your time, maybe in their own mind having problems in their own life and just pulled out. But again, most people that find themselves in these road rage situations are taking it personally. It's a personal situation and a personal environment. So rather than just sitting back and thinking, well, the driver didn't see me, or maybe they're not a very good driver, well, it doesn't actually matter because they didn't hit me, I didn't hit them, I didn't have a collision or an accident. There's no need for me to move into a rage-based state, but it's a personal event that's happened and that person takes it personally. So people that find or struggle to drive without moving into these anger-based states need to really look at their life, go back in meditation, go with a therapist, first of all moving themselves into a sovereign perspective to make sure there is no negative control, there is no negative unseen energies that are promoting and encouraging that type of behaviour. and then go back on the timeline and find what's happened to them in their life that they take things so personally and that they move into this very low frequency form of anger or rage so quickly. And there's always a trigger there somewhere. And a skilled therapist will very quickly be able to find that trigger. And of course, we all know that for most people, we start off with the home environment with the parents, the things that happened at home. Were you treated differently by your parents, your siblings? Did something happen to you? Is there an event that happened that caused you trauma or pain? Those sorts of things. So it's not very difficult to sit down with someone and in a very short period to go through the timeline of their life and we identify the actual event that is causing the problem. And then we can talk about that event. And as young Andrew said earlier, of course, forgiveness is the key. So when we forgive people for doing bad things to us, or things that we perceive to be bad, then of course we neutralise that negative anger energy. We remove that from the etheric vibration that is the core of us. And when those triggers are removed, people can then say very negative things to you that in the past may have upset you or caused you to be very angry. And you just sit and smile because, of course, you've taken away the trigger. And this is the key, friends, in these circumstances, is to work through the things that affect you in your life. Obviously, this podcast, we're detailing and talking about rage and anger primarily. But, of course, it's the same concept for everything. Just with a short amount of time to look back through your life and see the things that have affected you the most. Everyone has some things that have affected them the most. And we work on those things and we remove the triggers and we forgive the people that did bad things to us or mistakes that we've made. Because, of course, we have to take responsibility for our own choices. If you, let's say, were a veteran and you joined the army or you joined the military, you chose to do that. You chose to go to war, effectively. If some very negative experiences happened to you when you were at war, that, of course, is a direct recourse to your choice, the choice that you made. And therefore, you need to take responsibility that you joined something that was very dangerous and may have a very negative impact on your exoskeleton, or, of course, your emotional state or your conscious awareness. And then you need to work through taking responsibility for that choice. And then we come back and we find that trigger, we remove it, and we clear the trauma. And then, of course, we start to move our energy into a higher vibrating state. Because when we wake up in the morning and we're in a state of slight frustration or slight anger, then of course it doesn't take much to be triggered and to be made more angry. And this means that your general vibratory frequency is quite low. And of course, lots of things are going to happen to you on a daily basis because you're attracting the same frequencies into your field. Whereas what we want to do is we want to move into a higher vibrating place with more calmness and clarity and harmony in your life. And to do that, we must remove the negative vibrations. We must work through the shadow aspects, clear the triggers, move people out of our lives that are working with rage and anger. And we talk to them about their emotional state and we let them know that their emotional state is having a direct impact on us, on their family, on the people around them, work colleagues, people you work with. If someone in a work situation is always angry and negative, they're impacting everyone around them because they're not identifying, working through their own emotional traumas and triggers. So this is what we need to do, is we need to work through those triggers and traumas, clear that low vibration, allow our frequency of vibration to start to uplift and move into a positive place. And then we start to attract positive experiences. And this, of course, friends, is where life starts to change. Things become more positive. You don't find yourself in chaotic, negative situations with angry people. If you're noticing in your life that you're in the supermarket and there's people around you that are shouting or angry, having arguments with the people that work in the supermarket or other people, then you're attracted to subconsciously this low vibrating frequency and you're in the space of these low vibrating people. And we need to think, why am I having this experience? Why do I find these things keep happening to me? I can be in a room and someone starts to argue with me. I can be outside and I find myself in some chaotic situation. But of course, frequencies are matching all of the time. The universe is continually matching frequencies. So you're being put in a place because you're attracted to that place at that particular point in time because of frequency. So to move into a harmonic life and a place of clarity and calmness, your frequency of vibration has to change. And it will only change when you work through some of these negative experiences, clear them from your field, but most importantly, making sure your field is clear of negative intrusion. Because, of course, these negative entities or spirit attachments will drain your energy and will continue to create problems in your life. And I'm sure all of the SRT practitioners that are on these calls and listen to these podcasts will be smiling to themselves because they will identify with their life. Their life before SRT is probably very different to life after SRT, because before you work through the SRT practitioner training protocols, you are living your life. But as you start to engage in the teachings and understandings and things explained to you, you start to realise why things are happening in your life. And then, of course, as part of the training package, you start to work through, change your vibration, and by the time you move into certification, your vibration is a huge, huge amount higher than it was before you started the work. And of course, you've worked on yourself without realising that you've changed your thought process, you've certainly changed your vibration, you've changed your frequency. That means you've changed the biology inside you. Your blood pressure will be less than it was before because you're vibrating at a higher frequency. Therefore, you're in more harmony with yourself. So part of this training program really is to change yourself, and then of course you'll find yourself experiencing different things in life, much more positive things than you did before, because of course your vibration is higher. And that, I think, is the conclusion from my perspective for today's conversation really, is that people that are experiencing and finding themselves in states of anger and rage have to do some work, and it's quite quick to do, and it's very quick to clear. The key is to make sure that there isn't a negative influence that is orchestrating these sorts of emotional states from behind the scenes. And that, of course, goes for all spiritual work, really. If you want to be working from a spiritual perspective by yourself and on your own, and not any type of intrusion, not any type of coercive negativity. And bringing yourself into a sovereign state is obviously the first step on that road. So I will say good day to you all. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we've been able to explain some of the narrative around these types of emotional feelings and just some examples for people as to where they can come in and how we change them. So I will say good day to you all, and we will bring in Andrew back, and we will look forward to speaking again soon. Good day. Hi folks, so I'm back. So Chen's really, that's good. Like to change, Chen's finished early, which is all good. So hopefully we explained quite a bit about anger, rage, and those sorts of things, and where we are, and how we do things. Obviously, I'll probably work to find out where we are when I watch this recording back in the next hour or so. But for now, hopefully we've covered some things that you guys have been interested in. Again, if you've got questions about things or you need help or support, you can drop us an email. Jane from downstairs is the head of our email collection recipient point, so she picks up all the emails that come in. Obviously, people that are asking questions, we try and work with and pick up from. And again, we're trying to create more information on the website, on social media, all of the places that we can kind of spread the messaging that we do and the guidance from Chen that we do. We've also recently just been uploading all of our content to Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music and Deezer and other podcast platforms. So in theory, whatever you're on, you should be able to go to that particular podcast platform, type in Andy Porter, psychic surgeon, and we ought to pop up. And there's a whole load of stuff on there. So just kind of going back now over all of our old archives. It probably go back 15 years or something. So I've started to listen to some of them. It's quite interesting, even for me, really, to listen to the content that we were talking about sort of 15 years ago with some of the early kind of interviews and podcasts and things. And for quite a long time, we didn't really do interviews and podcasts. We didn't think it was something we were that interested in. And of course, that was a naivety, I guess, on this path of thinking that we wouldn't need to record and broadcast things sort of 15 years ago. It was just about doing the work, really. For me, it was all about hands-on, psychic surgery on a couch. That's where I kind of felt comfortable. So I like to do things. Chen was actually coming in and doing his work from that perspective. But I never really kind of figured that we'd be doing these sorts of things today. So just going through all of our old archives now to find things that we find or we think that you guys might find interesting to listen to. And all of those will be being popped onto these podcast platforms. Okay, well, I think I'll say goodbye, folks. Hopefully it's been interesting. And obviously we've got all stuff on Facebook and all the other places, Instagram. I think we've even got a Twitter. We've got a Twitter podcast, or Twitter whatever account now. I'm not really sure exactly how to use it particularly, but we're on Twitter. So Chen's continually giving us little jobs to do and things to do. And obviously we're kind of trying to adapt and do these things, but as I'm sure you're all aware, everything takes time, effort, and learning how to use it generally, which of course is the key. So I'll say good day, and we'll catch you again next week. Okay, cheers folks, bye bye.